The wind swept across the desert plain, carrying the scent of dust and sage. The sky burned orange and gold as the sun sank behind the canyon ridge, throwing long shadows across the ground. A lone rider approached from the west, his horse weary but steady. The man's skin was bronzed by the sun, his hair falling loose to his shoulders, and his eyes, dark as the earth itself, held a quiet warning. He was Apache, one of the last free men who still roamed the land that others were trying to claim. His name was whispered in the nearby towns with both fear and curiosity. Though few had seen him and lived to tell how he looked, near the base of a weathered rock stood a woman. Her breath unsteady, her dress torn from the journey. She had wandered too far from the settlement, searching for something or perhaps running from someone. The wind caught her hair, whipping it across her face as she looked toward the approaching horseman. Panic flashed in her eyes, but so did something else, hope, maybe, though it was faint. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the cold surface of the rock. The last bit of cover and a land to open to hide in. The rider dismounted, his boots silent on the dry soil. He studied her without a word, the muscles in his arms tense, as if he already knew what danger followed her. Behind them, from the canyon's far end, came the distant sound of hooves and voices, men shouting, searching. The woman turned toward the noise, then back to the stranger. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "They're coming. You don't understand I'm pregnant? Let me go." For a moment, the Apache said nothing. His gaze flickered toward the horizon, then back to her face. He moved closer, calm but firm, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "If I let you go," he said quietly, his accent heavy with the rhythm of another tongue, "they will find you before the moon rises." She tried to pull away, but he pinned her against the rock, not in anger, not in violence, but to shield her from the line of sight. The pounding of hooves grew louder, echoing through the canyons like thunder. Dust rose in the distance, marking the path of men who would kill to find her. She could feel his heart beat through the space between them, fast, but steady. Every sound around them magnified. The horse's breath, the rustle of dry weeds, the beat of her pulse in her ears. He kept his body between her and the open land, his back turned toward the danger, his eyes scanning the horizon. He wasn't protecting her because he knew her. He was protecting her because something deep inside told him it was right. The posse appeared at the far edge of the valley. 5 riders silhouetted against the light. They slowed their horses, eyes sweeping the landscape. The woman held her breath. One of the riders pointed toward the rock. The Apache's grip tightened just slightly enough for her to feel his strength. She wanted to scream, but his voice, low and steady, stopped her. "Do not move," he whispered. "If they see us, we both die." The men drew closer. Dust filled the air, thick and choking. The Apache's horse shifted uneasily, sensing the tension. The woman pressed her face against the stone, tears forming, but never falling. The riders passed within yards, scanning, murmuring. Then, as quickly as they came, they turned back toward the ridge, muttering that the trail had gone cold. The sound of their horses faded into the distance. When silence returned, the woman pushed weakly at his chest. "You had no right," she said, trembling. "You don't know who they are." He released her slowly and stepped back. "I know what men like that do," he answered. "And I know you have something they want." She turned away, clutching her arms as if to hold herself together. "You shouldn't have helped me," she said. "They'll come again. They always do." The Apache looked toward the horizon, where the last light of day was fading. "Then you'll need to be gone before morning." He walked toward his horse, but paused when she spoke again. "Why?" she asked. "Why save me?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because once," he said, "someone saved me." The wind rose again, lifting the dust into the air. She followed him with her eyes as he adjusted the saddle and mounted the horse. She didn't know whether to trust him or fear him. Every story she'd ever heard about the Apache told her to stay away. But every instinct told her that if she didn't follow him, she'd never survive the night. He noticed her hesitation and nodded toward the horizon. "There's water a mile east," he said, "and an old cabin where you can hide until dawn." She didn't move. Her heart told her to stay where she was, but her reason told her to listen. Finally, she took a step forward as they rode through the empty desert. The moon climbed higher, spilling silver light across the land. Coyotes called from far away, their cries echoing like ghosts. The woman shivered. The Apache rode silently beside her, his eyes fixed on the path ahead. He spoke little, but his presence felt like a shield between her and everything that hunted her. When they reached the cabin, a small, broken structure of wood and stone, he dismounted first and checked the area. The woman followed, her body weary, her mind tangled with fear and questions. Inside, the air was cold and smelled of old ashes. He started a small fire, its light flickering across his face. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow, you'll need strength." She sat near the fire, her hands trembling as she reached toward the warmth. "They think I stole something," she whispered, "but it's not what they believe. It's not gold or land," her voice broke. "It's life, my child, and they want to take even that from me." The Apache's eyes softened, but his expression remained guarded. "Then you'll have to fight," he said, "and I will help you fight." For a moment, neither spoke. The fire crackled between them, throwing shadows across the walls. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks, carrying the sound of distant thunder. The woman looked up. "You don't even know my name," she said. He looked into the fire, his voice low. "I don't need to." Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. In that cold, lonely night, surrounded by emptiness, she felt safer than she had in weeks. But she also knew that safety in such a world was only borrowed, never given. As the flames flickered low, he stood and went to the doorway, scanning the horizon again. The desert was silent now, but the air carried a strange weight, as if the storm had not yet passed. He sensed the danger that still lingered out there, watching, waiting, behind him. The woman's eyes slowly closed, exhaustion pulling her into uneasy sleep. The Apache remained awake, his hand resting on the handle of his knife, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the firelight. He had saved her once tonight, but in his heart he knew that whatever hunted her was not finished. The night deepened and the fire burned low. In the far distance, a lone coyote cried, its voice cutting through the silence. The Apache turned toward the sound, his jaw tightening. The danger was coming closer, and, by dawn, he would have to choose between his own freedom and the life of the woman he had vowed to protect. Morning crept slowly across the desert, washing the land in pale gold. The fire in the cabin had burned down to embers, its smoke curling faintly through the cracks in the walls. The woman stirred on the floor, her body aching from exhaustion and fear. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she saw him standing by the doorway, watching the horizon with that same unreadable stillness. His horse grazed quietly outside, tail flicking at the flies. She could tell he hadn't slept. The wind had changed overnight. It carried the scent of dust and iron, the kind that followed men on horseback. The Apache turned toward her when she moved, his eyes calm but alert. "They are not far," he said. "You can hear it if you listen." She sat up, clutching the blanket around her shoulders, and strained her ears. At first, there was nothing, only silence. Then faintly, somewhere far off, came the rhythmic echo of hooves against hard ground. Her heart sank. He began packing his saddlebag, moving with quiet precision. She watched him for a while before asking, "Where will we go?" He didn't answer right away. "North," he said finally. "Through the riverbed and the cliffs." "They won't follow there." She hesitated, her gaze dropping. "You're risking your life for someone you don't even know," she said softly. "You could leave me, and no one would blame you." He looked at her with that same steady calm. "If I leave you," he said, "you will die. I cannot let that happen." As they rode out, the land stretched before them, wide, endless, and unforgiving. The sun was already climbing high, and heat shimmered off the rocks like invisible fire. The woman held onto the saddle, trying not to look back, though she could feel the presence of the men behind them growing closer with each passing mile. She wanted to believe they could outrun the danger. But deep down, she knew the desert didn't let anyone escape easily. They rode for hours without speaking. the silence between them filled with the sound of hooves and wind. Occasionally, the Apache would glance toward the horizon, scanning for movement. Every ridge and canyon looked the same to her, but he seemed to read the land like a map. When the sun reached its peak, he stopped beside a cluster of rocks where a small trickle of water ran from the ground. "We rest here," he said. Only for a short time. She knelt beside the water to drink. He removed his bow from the horse and checked the string. His movements were deliberate, every motion practiced. She noticed a scar across his shoulder, long and faded, like an old wound that never fully healed. "You fought before," she said quietly. He nodded once. Many times. She wanted to ask more, but before she could, a sound cut through the still air, a faint metallic clink, like spurs against stone. The Apache's head snapped toward the noise. He raised a hand for silence, and she froze. Then, without a word, he moved toward the ridge, crouching low. She stayed where she was, her pulse racing. Moments later, he returned, his expression hard. "They've split into two groups," he said. "One follows our trail, the other rides to cut us off." Fear tightened her chest. "Can we make it?" she asked. He met her eyes. "If you trust me," they rode again, faster this time, pushing the horses through uneven terrain. Dust rose around them as they entered the narrow pass between cliffs. The walls towered high, trapping the heat, making it hard to breathe. Echoes of their hooves bounced off the rock, masking any sound of pursuit. The woman clung tightly, her fingers aching, her breath shallow. She couldn't tell if the pounding in her chest came from fear or from the life growing inside her that she had sworn to protect at last. They reached a high plateau overlooking the valley below. From there, she could see the faint glint of sunlight reflecting off rifles in the distance. The men were still coming. The Apache dismounted and led his horse behind a large boulder. "They'll search here soon," he said. "We can't stay long." He began gathering dry brush, setting a small fire, and covering it with a hide to produce smoke, thin and controlled. "This will lead them west," he said. "They'll think we've gone that way." As they waited, the woman watched him in silence. There was something about his presence, an unshakable calm that steadied her fear. She wondered what he had lost to make him so quiet. What memories haunted the dark behind his eyes? He moved like a man who had seen too much, who carried stories he'd never tell. When the sound of riders faded again, they continued north. By evening, the air had cooled, and the first stars began to appear. They reached a small ravine where the remains of an old homestead lay half buried in sand. The Apache led her inside the crumbling walls and set another small fire. "We'll stay until dawn," he said. "After that, we move to the canyon. There's a place there they won't find." She nodded, exhausted. Her hands shook as she tried to untie her cloak. He noticed and handed her a piece of bread from his bag. "Eat," he said simply. She hesitated, but took it. "Why do they want you?" he asked after a moment. She looked down, her voice trembling. "My husband owed them. He gambled everything, land, cattle, even his own men's trust. When he died, they came for me. Said I was the debt he left behind." He studied her quietly, understanding more than she said. "And the child?" he asked. Her eyes filled, but she didn't answer. "Instead," she whispered, "I just want to live long enough to bring him into this world." He nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "Then we'll make sure you do." The night deepened, and a soft wind moved through the broken walls. She drifted into uneasy sleep, dreaming of faces she couldn't save, of hands reaching through smoke and fire. The Apache stayed awake again, keeping watch. He could see movement far below the tiny flickers of campfires. The men were still tracking them. He knew by morning they would be closer. When the first light of dawn broke, he woke her gently. "We move now," he said. She blinked sleep from her eyes and gathered her things. They set out through the canyon, following the dry riverbed. The walls rose high on either side, red and cracked, as if carved by time itself. The path was narrow, forcing them to ride single file. Halfway through, the Apache stopped and dismounted, studying the ground. "Tracks," he said. "Fresh ones." He crouched, tracing the marks with his fingers. "Someone came through here not long ago." She looked around, fear creeping back into her chest. "Do you think it's them?" He didn't answer. His eyes moved to the canyon rim above. Then, suddenly he reached for her arm. "Down," he said sharply. They dropped behind the rocks, just as a gunshot shattered the silence. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, followed by another. Dust sprayed near her feet, and she gasped. He pulled her close, shielding her with his body as bullets struck the stones around them. "Stay low," he said, his voice calm but fierce. He raised his bow and fired toward the ridge, his arrow vanishing into the light. A cry followed, a man's voice, and in silence, they crawled along the canyon wall, keeping low. The horses had bolted down the path, but there was no time to chase them. More gunfire cracked through the air, closer now. They ran until the path opened into a small cave hidden by brush. Inside, the air was cool and damp. The woman sank to her knees, trembling. He crouched near the entrance, listening. After several tense minutes, the noise outside faded. He turned toward her. "They know we're near," he said. "They won't stop." She nodded, her eyes wide. "What will we do?" He looked toward the light filtering through the rocks. "We keep moving. There's a river beyond this canyon. If we reach it by night, we can cross before they find the trail." She tried to stand but stumbled. He caught her arm, steadying her. For the first time, she saw something flicker behind his calm weariness that mirrored her own. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "You could leave me," shook his head. "You don't understand," he said. "I've already done that once to someone who needed me. I won't do it again." She looked at him, unsure what he meant, but there was no time to ask. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and the wind picked up again, sweeping through the canyon like a warning. The storm was coming, and with it, the men who wanted her dead. The Apache stood at the mouth of the cave, scanning the horizon. His hand rested on his bow, his eyes cold and steady. The woman moved closer, her breath uneven. "If we don't make it," she said quietly, "promise me you'll save the child." He looked at her then, long and hard. "We'll make it," he said. But his voice carried something deeper, something that knew the desert didn't always keep promises. Outside, first drops of rain hit the ground, darkening the sand. The sky rumbled low, and the wind howled through the cliffs. Somewhere beyond the storm, the sound of hooves began again, closing in. The storm rolled in fast, swallowing the desert in wind and rain. Lightning split the sky, revealing the narrow canyon where the Apache and the woman had taken shelter. The rain turned the sand to mud, and thunder echoed like the pounding of war drums. The woman shivered, pressing her back against the stone wall as water dripped from the cave's roof. Outside, the Apache stood watch, the storm lashing against his face, his eyes scanning the horizon for movement. He knew the rain would erase their tracks, but it would also make escape harder. The canyon would flood by dawn. She watched him from the shadows, her breath shallow. He seemed untouched by the storm, though his shirt was soaked through. Every movement he made was deliberate, like he had been through storms worse than this. She wanted to ask him about his past, about the people he had lost, but the words stayed trapped in her throat. All she could think about was survival. The wind howled louder, and through it came another sound, a faint rhythmic pounding. It wasn't thunder. It was hooves. The Apache turned sharply toward the sound, his jaw tightening. "They're coming," he said. His voice was calm, but she could hear the warning in it. He moved quickly, checking his bow and knife. "They'll reach the mouth of the canyon before the river rises. We need to move now." She struggled to stand, her body weak from exhaustion. "I can't outrun them," she said. "Not like this." He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "You can," he said firmly, "because you must." He led her out into the storm. The rain stung their faces as they climbed the narrow path along the canyon wall. The riverbed below was already filling with water, roaring and violent. Each step was slippery, the rocks slick with mud. The woman clung to the jagged wall, her breath coming in short bursts. Behind them, torches flickered faintly in the darkness. Men, on horseback. Moving closer, when lightning flashed again, she caught a glimpse of their pursuers. There were maybe a dozen faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats, rifles slung across their backs. The Apache pushed her forward, his hand steady on her arm. "Keep moving," he said. "Don't look back." The path narrowed until it was barely wide enough for one person. She slipped, her foot sliding on the wet stone, but he caught her just before she fell. His grip was strong, his eyes locked on hers. For a second, everything else disappeared. The rain, the thunder, the men hunting them. Only fear and trust filled the space between them. They reached a small ledge halfway up the canyon. The Apache helped her climb, then crouched low, scanning the trail below. The riders had dismounted, moving cautiously through the rising water. He could see their leaders shouting orders, pointing toward the cliffs. They were coming straight for them. The woman clutched her stomach, breathing heavily. "We can't keep running," she whispered. "You'll die if you stay with me." The Apache shook his head. "Death is not what I fear," he said quietly. "Failure is," turned his eyes upward, toward the canyon rim where the land flattened into open plain. "If we reach the top," he said, "they'll have no cover to follow." He studied the rocks, then began to climb, finding footholds in the cracks. The woman followed, her hands trembling. The rain had eased, but the wind was fierce. Every gust threatened to throw them off balance. Halfway up, the Apache paused. He felt something of vibration through the stone. He looked down. The men below had started shooting. Bullets sparked against the rocks, one passing close enough to graze his arm. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the sting of blood. "Climb faster," he ordered. The woman tried, but her strength was fading. She slipped again, gasping, and for a moment her foot dangled over open air. The Apache reached down, grabbing her wrist. The strain pulled at his injured arm, but he didn't let go. With one last effort, he hauled her up beside him. She collapsed against the stone, shaking. "Why do you keep saving me?" she asked. He didn't look at her when he answered. "Because the world already took enough from me. I won't let it take you too." When they finally reached the top, dawn was breaking. The storm had passed, leaving the sky streaked with pink and gray. The open land stretched ahead, endless and quiet. For a brief moment, they both stood there, breathing hard, believing they had made it. But then the Apache turned and saw smoke rising in the distance, smoke from torches and campfires. The men were surrounding the canyon from both sides. "They've split again," he said grimly. "They'll close in before midday." The woman's voice trembled. "Then where do we go?" He looked toward the mountains in the far distance. "There's an old mission beyond those hills," he said. "If we can reach it, there may be people who'll help." He didn't add what they both knew. Distance was too far for her condition. Still, they rode on. The desert seemed endless, the sun merciless. The Apache led the way, always watching for movement behind them. By noon, they reached a stretch of dry grassland broken by scattered rocks. The woman's face was pale, her breathing uneven. "We need to stop," she said weakly. He helped her off the horse and guided her under a cluster of rocks that offered some shade. Her hands trembled as she reached for the water pouch. He handed it to her, then scanned the horizon again. He saw nothing but heat waves. Still, his instincts told him they weren't alone. A low whistle broke the silence, a signal. He turned sharply, bow ready. Then came the shout, and within seconds, 3 riders appeared over the ridge. He pushed the woman down behind the rocks and fired an arrow, striking the lead rider's shoulder. The man fell, screaming. The others ducked for cover, returning fire. The Apache moved like lightning, taking another arrow and loosing it before they could reload. One horse bolted, another man fell. The last rider dismounted and charged forward, rifle raised. The Apache dropped his bow and met him head-on. The 2 men collided, rolling through the dust. The rifle went off, the shot echoing across the plain. The woman covered her mouth to keep from crying out. She watched in terror as the Apache fought, every movement raw and desperate. He struck the man across the jaw, then grabbed his knife. The struggle ended as suddenly as it began. The rider collapsed, the dust settling around him, The Apache stood, breathing hard. Blood stained his side, but he didn't stop. He searched the fallen men, taking ammunition and a rifle. "We have to go," he said, voice tight. "Others will hear the shots." She looked at him, eyes wide with fear and something else, guilt. "You can leave me," she said again. "They want me, not you." He turned toward her, his face unreadable. "They want power," he said. "And power never stops with one life." They rode again, silent except for the sound of hooves and wind. The land grew rougher, hills rising on either side. The Apache's wound bled through his shirt, but he didn't mention it. Each time she looked at him, she saw the pain in his eyes, the determination that wouldn't let him stop as night approached. They finally saw the faint outline of the old mission against the horizon. Its roof was half collapsed, its bell tower leaning, but to her it looked like salvation. "We're almost there," she whispered. But as they drew closer, the Apache slowed. Smoke rose from behind the mission walls. He dismounted, pulling his knife. "Someone's there," he said quietly. She felt her heart sink. "Is it them?" He didn't answer. He crouched low, moving ahead to scout. The woman waited, clutching the horse's reins, the wind cold against her skin. Every second stretched into an eternity. When he finally returned, his expression was grim. "They found it before us," he said. "We can't go inside." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then where?" He looked out toward the hills beyond, the last light fading behind them. "There's one more place," he said softly. "But we'll have to fight our way through to reach it." The sound of distant voices drifted through the air of laughter, the crackle of fire. The Apache loaded the rifle, his movements slow but steady. The woman gripped his arm. "You can't take them all," she said. He looked at her then, his voice quiet but sure. "I don't need to take them all. I just need to buy us enough time." The wind rose again, carrying the smell of smoke and gunpowder. The desert had fallen silent, but beneath that silence, something dark and inevitable was building. The night ahead would decide everything: who lived, who fell, and what kind of world would remain when the storm was over. The night settled heavy over the desert, broken only by the faint flicker of firelight from the mission ruins ahead. Smoke curled into the air, carrying the smell of burned wood and something worse, men. The Apache crouched low behind a fallen wall, studying the scene with quiet focus. Around the campfire, 4 riders laughed and passed a bottle between them. Their horses tied to the posts where crosses once stood. Their rifles rested against the stones. But the way they moved showed they were alert, even while pretending to relax. The woman stayed hidden behind the ridge. She could see the fire through the cracks in the wall and the shadows of the men moving around it. Her heart pounded as she whispered, "How many?" The Apache didn't turn when he answered, "Enough to die slow, if we're seen." He adjusted the rifle he had taken earlier, checking the chamber. "We go around the far side. There's a well behind the mission. If we reach it, we can cross through the ravine before they see us." She nodded, though her hands trembled. Her body was weary, her legs aching from days of running, but fear was stronger than pain. She followed him silently, her boots pressing softly into the dust. The moon was thin, casting pale light over the cracked earth. Every sound felt louder than it should: the whisper of wind, the creak of leather, the faint rattle of pebbles shifting beneath their feet as they circled the ruins. The Apache stopped suddenly, raising a hand. Voices drifted from nearby, lower this time. 2 men stood apart from the others, near the broken bell tower, speaking in harsh tones. The Apache motioned for her to stay low and crept closer. She waited, barely breathing, her heart hammering against her ribs. From where she crouched, she could see their faces when the firelight flared. One tall and broad, his jaw marked by a deep scar. The other, younger, with restless eyes. "The boss says she's worth more alive," the younger one said, kicking at the dirt. "But if she's carrying that outlaw's kid, we might as well end it here." The scarred man spat into the dust. "You don't end nothing till you're told. We get paid when she's brought back breathing. After that, they can do what they want." The woman froze. Her throat tightened, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. The Apache heard every word too. His jaw clenched, but he waited until their footsteps faded. When he returned to her, his voice was quiet but sharp. "They know about the child." She swallowed hard. "Then it's over. They'll never stop." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Then we stop them first." They moved again, slipping behind the well as thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. The air smelled of rain, though the sky was clear. The woman crouched beside him, whispering, "We can't fight all of them." His eyes met hers, steady and calm. "We don't have to. Just the ones in our way." He scanned the ground and pointed to a narrow trail leading east, hidden by the well's stone rim. "That path will take us down to the riverbed. If we move before dawn, we can lose them in the fog." But before they could move, a sound shattered. The quiet a horse whinnied loudly, followed by the metallic clatter of a dropped canteen. One of the men near the fire shouted, "Who's there?" The Apache pushed her behind the well, his voice low and firm. "Stay down." He moved quickly, darting between the shadows of the crumbling walls. The men were already rising, guns in hand, scanning the dark. Another shout came, then a shot. The bullet hit the stone near her head, sending chips flying. She bit back a cry, covering her mouth. The Apache fired back once, the shot echoing through the ruins. Chaos erupted. Horses screamed, men cursed, and flames flared as one of them kicked over the fire. He grabbed her hand and pulled her through the opening in the wall. "Run." They sprinted into the open plain, the night wind sharp against their faces. Behind them, more shots rang out. The woman stumbled but didn't fall, the Apache's grip keeping her upright. The ground was uneven, scattered with rocks and thorns. Her lungs burned, her heart thudding so hard it hurt. After a while, the gunfire faded, replaced by the pounding of hooves. The riders were after them. The Apache turned, lifting the rifle and firing twice. One horse faltered, but the others kept coming. "Faster!" he shouted. They reached a ridge, where the land dropped into a wide basin filled with dry grass. "Down there," he said, helping her descend. They slid down the slope, dust and stones tumbling beneath their feet. At the bottom, he caught her before she fell. "Keep moving," he said. "They'll reach the ridge soon?" Her breath came in ragged gasps. "I can't," she said, clutching her side. "I can't go any farther." He turned to her, his face hard with determination. "You have to. For the child, for the life they want to destroy." She looked up at him, tears mixing with dust on her cheeks. "Why do you care?" she whispered. He hesitated for the first time. His voice dropped. "Because I once had a family. They took them from me the same way they're trying to take you." Before she could answer, a shot cracked overhead, followed by another. The riders had reached the ridge. Bullets struck the ground around them, kicking up dust. The Apache grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the tall grass. They crouched low, moving through the brush as more gunfire echoed across the basin. They reached a cluster of rocks near the far side and ducked behind them. The Apache loaded the last of his bullets, counting under his breath. 6 left, he said. "That's all." The woman trembled beside him, clutching her knees. "We won't make it," she whispered. He looked at her with quiet certainty. "We will." The hoofbeats grew louder. Shadows appeared at the edge of the grass, torches in hand. The men spread out, searching. The flames cast long, shifting shapes over the ground. The Apache steadied his breathing, raising the rifle. "When I tell you to run, you go east," he said. "Follow the stars until the river bends. Don't stop." Her voice broke. "What about you?" He didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the firelight moving closer. One of the men dismounted, shouting orders. Another fired into the grass, the bullet whizzing past their heads. The Apache fired back, striking the torch from the man's hand. The sudden darkness threw the group into confusion. "Now," he said. She ran. The grass whipped against her legs as she stumbled through the dark. Behind her, gunfire erupted again. She looked back once and saw flashes of light, then a figure falling. Her chest clenched, but she couldn't stop. She ran until her legs gave way and she collapsed near the dry Riverbed, the night was silent except for the wind and the distant thunder of horses. She crawled toward a fallen tree, hiding beneath it, her breath ragged. The pain in her side was sharp, but she pressed her hand to it and tried to stay still. Then she heard its footsteps, slow, uneven. Her heart leaped into her throat. A shadow moved through the darkness, tall and familiar. It was him. The Apache staggered toward her, blood streaking his arm. She reached for him, relief flooding through her. "You're alive," she whispered. He sank beside her, breathing hard. "For now," he said. They stayed there, listening. The riders passed above them, their torches flickering like dying stars. After a long time, the sound faded, swallowed by the wind. The Apache's head rested back against the tree. His face was pale, his breath shallow. She touched his arm gently. "You're hurt." He nodded faintly. "Not the first time." She looked around at the endless darkness, fear settling deep in her chest. What if they come back? He opened his eyes and looked at her. "Then we fight again," he said quietly, "until there's nothing left to take." The night grew colder. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled. The woman leaned closer to the Apache, her hands shaking. He closed his eyes, listening to the wind. "We're not safe yet," he said softly. "They'll wait for dawn." She nodded, though exhaustion pulled at her. The firelight from the distant camp was still faintly visible through the mist. The Apache's hand tightened on the rifle, his body tense. He could feel it, the storm of violence building again, closer than before, as dawn began to rise. Painting the desert in pale gray, the first sound of hooves returned. The woman's breath caught. The Apache looked at her, his voice steady despite the danger. "It ends today," he said. She stared at him, eyes wide, fear and faith tangled together. The riders were coming fast now, their shouts echoing through the canyon. The Apache stood, blood still dripping from his arm, and faced the rising sun. The moment hung heavy between them, the final calm before everything exploded into fate. The first rays of morning light broke over the desert, soft but sharp, painting the canyon in shades of gold and rose. The wind had quieted, leaving a strange stillness in the air. The Apache stood tall on the rise, his rifle steady in his hands. His eyes locked on the distant dust trail where the riders approached. Behind him, the woman clung to the fallen tree, her breath coming fast, one hand pressed against her stomach. She wanted to scream for him to hide, to run. But she knew he wouldn't. There was a resolve in his stance that no storm, no man could shake. The riders drew closer, their horses kicking up clouds of sand. There were fewer now, Fave, maybe 6, but they moved with purpose. Their leader rode ahead, the scarred man she'd seen before, his coat torn, his face twisted with fury. "There's nowhere left to go," he shouted across the plain. His voice carried on the wind. "Hand her over, Apache, and I'll let you live." The Apache didn't answer. He stood firm, his eyes scanning the horizon as though measuring the distance between breath and death. He loaded a single bullet, his hands steady. "You already took everything that made me live," he murmured under his breath, too quiet for them to hear. The woman tried to stand, but her legs trembled. "Please," she called weakly, "don't do this." He turned his head slightly, enough for her to see his face in the rising light. There was calm there and acceptance that broke her heart. "It has to end here," he said softly. "If not, it will never end." The men dismounted, spreading out. The scarred man raised his gun. "Last chance," he said. "Step aside." The Apache lifted his rifle and fired first. The shot struck the man beside the leader, knocking him down before the others could react. Gunfire exploded in response, echoing through the canyon. The woman dropped to her knees, covering her ears as bullets ripped through the air. Dust and smoke rose around them. The Apache moved with precision, each shot measured, each breath controlled. One by one the riders fell, but they were too many. A bullet grazed his shoulder. Another tore through his side. He stumbled but stayed upright, reloading with one hand. The scarred man advanced, shouting curses, firing wild. The Apache's final bullet hit his gun, shattering it into pieces. The man lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. They rolled through the dust, fists and fury colliding. The woman screamed his name, crawling forward, her hands scraping against the rough earth. The fight was brutal, silent except for the grunts and gasps of effort. The Apache struck the man's jaw, then caught his arm before he could reach for his knife. The struggle lasted only seconds, but felt like an eternity. Then it was over. The Apache pushed himself up slowly, breathing hard. The scarred man lay still in the dust, his face turned toward the sun. The silence that followed was deafening. Smoke drifted through the morning air. Mixing with the faint smell of gunpowder and rain, the woman stumbled toward him, tears streaming down her face. "You're hurt," she whispered. "You're bleeding." He looked at her with tired eyes. "It's nothing," he said, though the blood soaked through his shirt. His voice softened. "It's finished." She shook her head, falling to her knees beside him. "No, it's not. You have to come with me. You have to live." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from peace rather than joy. "I've lived more in these few days than in all my years before." He looked past her, toward the open horizon. "You'll be safe now. The child will be safe." She gripped his hand tightly. "Don't talk like that. You can't leave me now." He reached up, brushing her hair back with trembling fingers. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "The world will keep trying to take what's good. Don't let it." She pressed her forehead to his chest, her tears soaking into the fabric. "You saved me," she whispered. "You saved both of us." The Apache's eyes drifted to the sky. The wind stirred again, gentle this time, carrying the scent of sage and morning rain. His hand fell still in hers. The desert held its breath. Time passed quietly after that. The woman sat beside him for a long while, the sun climbing higher, warming the land. The horses wandered near, their reins dragging through the dust. When at last she stood, she felt a strength inside her she didn't know she had. She buried him near the riverbed beneath the shade of a mesquite tree, using stones to mark the spot. The wind rustled through the branches, whispering softly, almost like a farewell. Days turned into weeks. She found her way north, following the river until she reached the old mission again. It was empty now, silent except for the sound of water dripping from the roof. She stayed there, tending to the land, rebuilding what she could. Sometimes at night, when the fire crackled low, she would hear the wind move through the canyon and swear she could still feel him watching quiet, steady, unbroken. When the child came, the sky was clear and full of stars. She named him after the man who saved them, not in the way of words, but in the spirit she taught him to carry. He grew strong and kind, with the same calm strength in his eyes. The people in the nearby towns spoke of the woman who lived alone by the mission, the one who once ran from death and built a new life from its ashes. They said she was guarded by something unseen, something that kept danger from her door. Years later, when the boy asked her about his father, she told him the story not of fear or loss, but of courage. She told him how a man with no reason left to fight found one again in the hope of saving someone else. She told him how, in the wildlands where law and mercy often meant the same thing, goodness could still survive, and when the boy asked what happened to the man after he saved them, she smiled and looked toward the hills beyond the mission. "He became part of this land," she said. "Every storm, every sunrise, every wind that blows across this desert carries a piece of him." At night, when the firelight flickered against the walls, she would sit by the window, holding her child close, watching the stars. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes called across the plain, and the wind whispered through the stones. She didn't feel fear anymore. The land that once chased her now felt like home. The years passed, and the scars of the old world faded. The mission walls grew strong again under her hands. Travelers who stopped by spoke of a woman who healed the wounded and offered shelter to the lost. They said she carried the strength of two souls, the woman and the warrior who once stood against the storm together. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the desert turned gold, she walked to the riverbank where she had laid him to rest. The water shimmered in the fading light. She knelt and placed her hand on the stones, worn smooth by time. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "You saved me." The wind rose softly, brushing through her hair, carrying the familiar scent of sage and dust. For a moment, she thought she heard a distant voice, calm, steady, like the one that had guided her through the darkest nights. She closed her eyes and smiled. When she opened them again, the horizon stretched wide and endless before her. The sun sank slowly, setting the desert ablaze in color. Behind her, the old mission stood strong against the evening sky, its bell tower casting a long shadow across the ground. The woman turned toward home, her child waiting by the doorway, his eyes bright, his face touched by the last light of day. She took his hand, and together they walked inside as the night settled over the desert once more. The wind whispered through the canyons as it always did, carrying with it the echoes of a story that would outlast time, a story of love born in danger, of sacrifice and strength, of a man who gave his life so that another could begin anew. And somewhere out there, in the vast silence of the land he once called home, the spirit of the Apache still rode with the wind, forever watching over the woman and the child he had sworn to protect.